Hello and welcome to the MovieKing Podcast. My name is David Jurmann and I'll be your host. On today's episode, I'll be reviewing the film Thunderbolts. So to be honest, when this movie was first announced, I kind of rolled my eyes. It was at that time when Marvel started being a lot less consistent with their projects than they were. I mean, before Endgame, they used to be on top of the world. Almost every project was 90% or above on Rotten Tomatoes. They had a few, maybe that weren't great, but literally everything from 2008 to 2021 was all fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. And they were just cranking out projects consistently that people liked and enjoyed. They were all 4-quadrant movies, meaning that you could enjoy a Marvel movie regardless of your age and gender. But it was at this time when Marvel was being a lot less consistent with their projects now, and they were seemingly greenlighting a lot of stuff just to meet some kind of quota, assumingly from Disney. And you had stuff like Agatha All Along, Armor Wars, and Vision Quest, and I didn't really see any reason to make these projects other than to have more content for Disney Plus, and that's how Thunderbolts appeared to me as well, just as a product for a quota, not really to meet, an artist or to do something really cool. And, I just saw Thunderbolts as that kind of movie, only that it's a movie for theaters and not a show for streaming. So it seemed kind of unnecessary to begin with, on top of the fact that most of the leads in this film are C-list characters, and besides Bucky, Elena, and Red Guardian, the rest of the team are people I really didn't care about to begin with. John Walker, Taskmaster, and Ghost were all handled pretty poorly in my opinion in their films and shows, and on top of all that, all I could assume is that this would be a Suicide Squad ripoff that wouldn't have the gut to kill any major characters off. And that just kind of had me be like, why even make this movie? You're not going to do the even part of the Suicide Squad. The point of Suicide Squad is to kill off the characters. And this to me just seemed very much like that kind of movie where it's let's just get a bunch of, lesser known characters and we'll have them go against the big bad and, they'll kind of have to sacrifice themselves. That's kind of what this movie seemed like just on first glance. And let me tell you though, for a movie with very few surprises in the story that doesn't really wow me. There weren't a lot of things in this movie that was oh, I didn't see that coming. That's so unexpected. Almost everything in this movie, I could argue, was pretty expected from the trailers or the poster or the marketing, whatever. But let me say, as someone who didn't think the movie had that many surprises, this movie as a whole is one heck of a pleasant surprise. And it really comes down to the level of talent on display. Marvel actually released a trailer that parodied an A24 movie trailer, but when you realize who is behind the camera, it's a lot of great people. It's the writers and director of the show Beef, the cinematographer of The Green Knight, the editor of Minari, the production designer of Hereditary, the composers of Everything Everywhere All at Once, and you can really feel all that talent on display shine through when you see the movie. Sometimes lately I'll watch a new Marvel movie, and it just won't feel like it's made by a group of artists. It won't feel like this does. It just feels like it's made by executives, made by a committee who are just giving instructions on how to make a Marvel movie, and that's just not very appealing, and that's why a lot of people have gotten, they call it comic book fatigue or superhero movie fatigue, just, this feeling that they're all the same, and they're not really interesting anymore, and it's all just multiverse, and blech, and it just feels like slop. I've been saying to people, the problem isn't even that we're getting so many comic book movies. The problem is that a lot of them just aren't very good. You have Captain America Brave New World that came out a few months ago. That felt like a movie made by committee. That didn't feel like a movie that was made by people who were excited and love the characters and have so much passion for the source material. That's not what I felt watching that. When I watched that movie, I just felt bored and I felt underwhelmed. This movie, though, Thunderbolts, feels like it's made by people who love these characters and really wanted to make the best movie they could. Similar to Ryan Coogler with Sinners, or Ryan Coogler again with Black Panther, or even some people like James Gunn with the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. He puts his all into those films, and they all feel like something that came out of his heart. And look, Thunderbolts makes me so happy, because it's the first time since Avengers Endgame where I've seen a movie made by Marvel and felt like the MCU wasn't just taking a step in the right direction again, but it's actually back on track. And to be clear, I do think a few movies that have come out since Endgame have been a little bit better than this, namely Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 and Spider-Man No Way Home. I think I would rank those movies a little bit higher than this. But look, those were movies I loved because they were emotionally satisfying and built on previous movies and storylines and closed out a trilogy for their characters. And this movie, meanwhile, Thunderbolts, is a movie that had to work all on its own and make me care about characters I didn't have any investment in beforehand. And it had to take all the characters who have been established already, and still make it very accessible to people who haven't seen their projects. And I think this movie perfectly encapsulates what I love and what so many other people love about Marvel movies pre-Endgame. It has good characters, it has heart, it's funny, it's satisfying, it has good action, and it's fun. It's really a great film, and despite the fact that this movie is a team-up of characters from other projects, ones I didn't even care about mostly, it does not feel like homework at all. This movie gives you all the information you need, so you won't be lost if you're not all caught up, and I really think that they do a pretty good job just kind of catching people up on what's going on with these characters, where they were last seen, what they were doing last, and where they stand now. I've seen all the projects, so I can't really speak to, absolutely 100%, you will not be lost, but just watching it, I think Multiverse of Madness, Doctor Strange, that came out, and I was like, I feel like you kind of had to watch WandaVision to really get that movie. And this time, watching Thunderbolts, though, I really feel like they explained everything well, so you could watch this and be on the same track, which is what Marvel did so well beforehand, and I'm so glad they're doing it again now. And this is really how Marvel was at its peak. Anyone could enjoy a Marvel movie, whether they had seen the others or not. And if you did, you were rewarded for it. You would get Easter eggs and fun references to other things, and you would be like, oh, I got that. And then other people would be like, what are you laughing at? And you'd be like, oh, you have to watch the other movies to get it. But even if you didn't watch those other movies, you wouldn't be totally lost. You could watch Avengers Infinity War without watching any other Marvel movie, and you'd be able to enjoy it perfectly fine. You'd be able to be entertained by it. I mean, I know someone in college who had never seen a Marvel movie until Avengers Endgame, literally the finale to everything. And, I'm sure they missed a lot of the references, but I remember they said, oh, that was a really good movie. I really enjoyed that one, and I want to watch all the others now. And I think that just kind of speaks to what Marvel was as a brand. And speaking back to this movie, though, I also like how it's a standalone story, but also sets up things for what lies ahead, which is also how a lot of movies for the Infinity Saga were, and is part of the genius of producer Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios. These movies tell their own stories, but then feel like essential viewing for the bigger picture, and that could even be said about Marvel's weaker projects. Thor: The Dark World was not a very well-received movie by fans, and even critics weren't huge on it, but it's a movie that you think back over time and you watch Endgame and you're like, oh, the Thor: The Dark World actually still feels like essential viewing, It's a movie that I didn't really love, but at least they tried to do something with it that makes me appreciate it a little more, and it wasn't just a waste of time, it actually contributed to something. And I just really like that. And a lot of projects these past few years have forgotten how to do that. But getting back on track for the movie at hand, I was so pleasantly surprised by how much I like the story and the characters here. The trailers didn't give that much away, so I won't either. But basically, we're seeing a lot of these loud and less heroic characters reluctantly work together to stop another force at play. That's all I'll say. I don't want to say any more because I think to say, what the story really is would kind of be a bit of a spoiler, but not that there's really too many surprises, but I think just the way things kind of go in the story are pretty interesting. I really enjoyed the story here. And the characters here are all fun and have a good team dynamic too. They're all very loud and obnoxious characters who all like to speak and yell over each other. And you would think that would get annoying, but it kind of has that Guardians of the Galaxy sort of feel to it, where it feels like characters who are yelling over each other, but they're also enjoyable. You like to watch them. They feel kind of like a family in some ways. Yelena and Red Guardian were probably my favorite characters of the bunch going into the movie, and they're probably still my favorite coming out of it. Yelena is really the heart of this movie and the lead. Red Guardian is very funny and brings a lot of humor to the movie. I thought a lot of his jokes landed and were very good. Taskmaster and Ghost are still pretty forgettable characters, and I think Taskmaster in particular is one of the most wasted characters in the entire MCU. I really don't like what they've done with this character, but I also understand that you can't give everyone a great arc in this movie, so these two characters serve their purpose. I wasn't totally pissed off, but as I'll kind of get to later with my issues with the film, I just don't really care for what they did with Taskmaster and Ghost. Bucky is always a lot of fun to watch, and John Walker was a surprising highlight of the movie, considering how much I didn't enjoy the way his character arc wrapped up in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So I really enjoyed Wyatt Russell here. I think he just did a really good job with the character, and really all the performances here just do a great job and are a large reason these characters are so fun to watch interact. And then you have Bob. I'm not going to say much about Bob here, but he is excellent. Just know he's a really interesting character who will probably have a lot to do in the future. And what this movie did with his character is pretty fascinating. And along with Yelena, I think he's the beating heart of this movie. You really feel both of those characters kind of drive home the themes of what this movie's trying to say and what it's trying to do. And they just did a really great job. And I think just with the characters as a whole, I loved watching these characters just kind of talk and get to spend time together, because after a great action sequence early on in the film, you actually do spend a large portion of the movie just watching these characters talk and interact and argue and bicker with each other. And you could think that would get annoying, but it's really endearing and kind of entertaining. Almost similarly to the first Avengers movie, it's just a lot of witty banter, and it's just a lot of fun. I mean, I really didn't expect to like that part of the movie as much as I did, considering how much I just didn't care for a lot of these characters beforehand. I just really enjoyed the team dynamic, and that is what I look forward to seeing again in the future with these characters. I really hope we do anyway, so that's really cool. And then I also want to touch on the villain of this movie, who is one of the best Marvel has had in a while. There's not much motive per se, like it's not a villain where, you kind of understand like why they're trying to do what they're doing. But it's just a really interesting kind of metaphor the villain has. The villain is kind of a metaphor for something, and it works beautifully. I love the execution and the visualization of it too. There's some really cool stuff going on visually that they do with the villain, and I don't want to say too much because, again, I think if you haven't really seen the trailers and you don't know much about the characters, it's a little bit of a spoiler, but so I'm not going to say much of that. But I think the villain is just a really big standout here. Probably one of the best villains in a while. Like, I would say it probably is the best villain since at least Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, or if not that, then probably the best villain since Thanos. I really like the villain here. And the action, as I mentioned, is great. There's some good combat and a fun chase scene, but what really stood out to me is how little of this movie feels heavy on CGI or visual effects, especially in like the first 2/3 of the film. Even Shang-Chi, which was big on hand-to-hand combat, leaned heavily into CGI during its scenes. Like, have that big train sequence in Shang-Chi where, like, it starts off pretty hand-to-hand and then kind of turns into, like, just a cartoonish, like, crazy train chase. I don't know what the hell it was, but that was nuts. There was a lot of visual effects going on. Thunderbolts, though, doesn't do too much of that, except for one scene, which was still very cool. But not a lot of visual effects, and I appreciated that. It looked like it was done largely on camera, very practically, and for this kind of movie that really stands out, like, I really appreciated that they did that. I wasn't expecting it, but I really liked it. You even have that behind-the-scenes video of Florence Pugh actually, like, leaping off a building, and, I don't think she, like, jumped very far, but, like, she did dive off the building very briefly on a wire. That's in the movie, too. And it was just done practically. Like, they could have gotten a stunt person to do that. They could have done a visual, CGI, but they got Florence Pugh to do it. And I think it's just really awesome how much this movie does practically. It really makes it feel a lot more real and exciting. So, very much dug that. And I love the score for this movie. I will say it pains me that they didn't use Yelena's theme from Black Widow. I love that theme so much, and it's probably one of my favorite themes in the entire MCU. But I just love how refreshing and different this score sounds. I think they knocked it out of the park, and I think it really stands out. Like, it's a really cool, different sounding score. Kind of like in the way Thor Ragnarok was. It just sounds nothing like the rest of the MCU, music-wise. And I just really dug what they did here. And lastly, I really like the pace this movie has. A lot happens, but it goes by quickly. And it still finds time to breathe and take its time before things get more hectic. So the movie definitely has some very fast-paced stuff, but it also just takes its time. I liked that it just didn't rush through everything. and we got some nice moments to really just get to know the characters before things happened. So I was just really happy with the way this movie is paced. I've seen some people say you could probably cut some stuff out of the first third. I could see that, but I think it just flows very well. I've seen the movie twice now. I literally saw this movie 2 days in a row. That's how much I liked it. I thought it worked very well. But getting into some of my cons with the film, one is that there's some overly expository scenes where characters just outright say who they are and what they've been through. It's mostly played for laughs, like the characters are competing for who has the worst trauma. It was a little less jarring to me on the second watch, but I still think it could have been written a little better. I mean, I get that the whole scene was kind of meant to like inform the audience on where these characters have been, and that's what I was saying the movie does well. Like, it does let people know, who these people are, so you don't have to do the homework of watching all the shows. I just think they could have done it a little more naturally. I think some of it was a little bit too, like, robotic the way they said it, but otherwise, it wasn't too bad. On the other side of that argument, though, I would have actually liked to see a more visual glimpse into other characters' trauma. Without getting into spoilers, we kind of see a few glimpses into the past for a few characters, but only like half the team gets that. And I understand the argument that the other movies and shows the characters are in explore the trauma and they say it out loud in Thunderbolts, but I think visualizing it for the audience, even if only for a few seconds, would have made the third act hit just a little bit harder. I saw that the director even said he was like considering doing that for all the characters. It just wasn't really adding up time-wise, and they just had to kind of get to other things. It's kind of like a little bit of a trade-off, but I think they could have just done even a couple of seconds just showing it for some characters. I would have liked that. And another issue I have is that some characters are pretty sidelined and don't feel all that memorable. A character like Ghost, who I already wasn't a huge fan of, just doesn't get much new development and is more of a plot device than a character here. Same goes for people like Taskmaster and even Bucky. They're just kind of there as a plot device. I didn't really feel like I learned much about them, but you know what? Like, again, I enjoyed the team dynamic, so I'm fine they're there. Just would have liked maybe a little more development. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, Taskmaster is easily one of the most wasted characters in the entire MCU to me. I don't know how you could do practically nothing interesting with one of the most cool villains out there. It's just kind of frustrating to me, and I really don't know if Marvel will ever do anything interesting with the character again, but we'll see. I mean, I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Maybe we'll get a new interpretation down the line of the character that maybe, like, kind of goes away from what this one was doing. But I don't know. I really don't like what they did with Taskmaster here. And my only other big issue with the film is that after the big climax of the movie, there's maybe only like 3 or 4 minutes that pass before the credits roll. And the story does end by that time, but I think just taking another beat to close things out with the team would have felt a bit more satisfying instead of rushing to the finish line. I just think the movie needed a few more minutes to just let the characters wrap up their stories and just kind of like settle down and like maybe just take a breather, but it just really goes very quickly. Like the climax ends and the credits are there before you even know it. So just would have liked a little bit more time for that. But those few issues aside, Thunderbolts is one of the best MCU films I think we've gotten in a long time. It's easily in my top 3 since Avengers Endgame, and even as a whole, I think it just cracks my top 10 overall. Like, I really liked it a lot. After being very disappointed with the overall direction the MCU has been heading in over these last few years, I really just can't even begin to tell you how happy it makes me that this movie delivers. And it just delivers so well. And how it reminded me of everything the MCU used to be and why so many people loved it in the first place. And it makes me happy that this movie isn't good because it's closing out a trilogy or because it's banking on nostalgia. It's not, doing all this multiverse stuff or, like Deadpool and Wolverine. I enjoy Deadpool and Wolverine, but I think it's a mess story-wise, and it was really just a satisfying fan experience. But this movie isn't doing that. It's not trying to bank on nostalgia. It's just doing its own thing so well. And frankly, this movie actually had a lot going against it because it's about a very unpopular group of side characters from other projects, and I almost assumed that this would be one of those movies that needed an abundance of homework to watch and enjoy. But as it turns out, I think this is a very good standalone movie that is exactly what the MCU needs right now. It's not a perfect film. I think it does have some issues, but it's a film I'll happily rewatch over and over in the future. I really enjoyed it, and I'm going to give it a B+. And that about does it for this episode. If you want to follow my reviews, you can find me on Letterboxd at MovieKing1224. You can also listen to this podcast on your favorite apps such as Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. If you have any comments or feedback, I would love to hear it and improve this show. And of course, if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell to hear more like it. I appreciate you all so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.